Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. I will be allowing people into the Zoom for the next minute or two. And while I do that, please get comfy, grab your water or your lunch or whatever you need for the next 45 minutes or so. And if you don't mind, please use the chat to tell us your name and where you're joining us from. It's so good to see so many people already on the call with us today. We're very excited to get started. As you come in, please use the chat and tell us your name and where you're joining us from. Thank you again for being here. Give me just one more minute to allow more people in, and then we will get started. If you're a Harding colleague who would like professional development credit, would you please put your name and your department in the chat, and I will share that with Kathy Dillon. Just give us one more minute. Again, thank you so much for making time to be with us today. My name is Dr. Andrea Bishop, and I direct the Center for Leadership and Development at Harding. And I am very happy to share the spotlight today with my very good friends, Dr. Ellen Jones, who is an associate professor of pharmacy here at Harding, and her husband, Ben, assistant professor of theater. Ben and Ellen have one of those ridiculously adorable this is how we met stories. Ben, Ellen, and I were all at Harding together. We started our freshman year together in I'm just going to say the 90s and let you guess what year that was. But their story is that they met freshman year when they were assigned to be dance partners in Harding's production of Funny Girl. And if that is not the cutest thing ever, I just don't know what it is. So thank you, Ellen and Ben, for sticking together for so long and also for saying yes when I came to you with this crazy webinar idea. About a year or so ago, I started noticing that I was really gravitating towards articles and research materials about the benefits of improv for developing agile minded leaders. And I'm going to be completely honest, it took me a few months to get brave enough to actually consider trying to do a webinar on improv. But once I settled on it, I knew exactly that Ben and Ellen were the people to ask to help, and they didn't even hesitate. They gave me a big yes. And so thank you, Ben, and thank you, Ellen, for that yes, and thank you for being here. I'm going to share my screen with you and we're going to get started. Okay, here we go. Ben, help us get started. What exactly is improv? Can you define it for us since you are our resident theater experts?
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. We're glad to be here today. Improvisational theater, or well, improv is short for improvisational theater. And in the theater world, it is unplanned or unscripted performances that are created spontaneously by the performers, often with suggestions or input from audience members or perhaps a side coach who guides the process sometimes. There may be prompts about who they're playing or where they are or some situation, but really the rest of the details and the storyline is all discovered together. Historically, it's had two main purposes. One is, if you know anything about improv, you probably know the first one of the purposes is entertainment. And so if you've ever seen a TV show like Whose Line Is It Anyway, where basically they play improvisational games, that's one form of improv. And then within the performance world of theater training, we use improv in classwork and workshops in order to help students or actors develop their characters or understand the skills that it takes to perform. One of the misconceptions about improv is it doesn't have to be funny, although most of the entertainment value, like Whose Line, it is meant to be funny. And sometimes even in class or workshops, it ends up being funny just because of the circumstances. It's also important to recognize that it's non-competitive. It's not about one person achieving a goal or beating the other person, but it's about them collaborating creatively, working together in order to discover something about the character or the situation. And because of that, it requires that the performers trust each other and they trust the people that are in the room with them, whether that be other students or an audience, and that they work together. So, I mean, the short version is it's unscripted performances.
Right. Thank you for that. And Ellen, you've shared with me that you actually use improv with pharmacy students and when in your profession. So can you tell us what that looks like?
Sure. So I work in healthcare, and for the most part, healthcare does not take place in a vacuum. It's always part of a team. And if it's only an interaction between myself and a patient, the patient is still a member of that healthcare team. And so I talk about that a lot for my pharmacy students. So one of the things is that when I'm working with my students, you never know what's on the other side of that door when you knock on that patient room, or you never know what question somebody's going to have in the aisles at the pharmacy. And so these interactions tend to be unpredictable, or you may even have a plan and you start to implement it and we need to pivot for whatever reason. And if you're not prepared for that sort of thing, you can really get derailed. And so what we do is, preparation kind of sounds counterintuitive when you're talking about improvisation. It's kind of the opposite. But at the same time, having confidence in your knowledge minimizes the anxiety of not knowing how that interaction might play out. So we talk about being ready to improvise at any moment when you're dealing with a patient or with a provider or another member of the team, nurse, social work, housekeeping. You never know what sort of interactions you're going to have, but it's those two different components. It's the knowing the right answer and the right follow-up questions, but it's also having the confidence on how to manage the encounter. And so the more opportunities you have to rehearse that kind of encounter, the more confidence you're going to have going into the unknown. And when you can prepare your students or your team or yourself for not being afraid of what's on the other side of the door because maybe you've seen it before or you have the confidence to manage it, it makes everything go more smoothly. So that's why we talk about being prepared for the unknown with improv.
I love that. Thank you so much. I think that that was a great way to sort of jump into what we're going to do today. But before we go any further, let's go ahead and establish our three goals. Ellen, do you mind walking us through those?
Sure. So, our first goal today is going to be to talk about improv as both a method, which is what you do, but also a mindset, and that's how you would approach any interactions. Our second goal will be talking about saying yes and how that relates to improv, and then also building blocks when you're talking about idea creation. And then for our third goal would be to talk about teamwork, trust, and then embracing mistakes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I am a huge advocate for creative thinking, for collaboration, for effective communication. And those ideas are constantly being worked into anything that I do in a leadership situation or when I'm teaching leadership and communication. I'm also a ridiculously like religious over planner. And Ellen, you just kind of talked about this, but before I started researching all of this and learning from you guys, I thought that being an over planner was actually counterintuitive to improv. I mean, that was my first instinct, but you guys have taught me that improv is actually another way to just help me prepare for the unknown, and that's what all leaders need, which is pretty remarkable. So Ben, explain to us, if you can, how exactly does improv help you prepare? How does it help a performer prepare?
Sure. I mean, anytime that you practice a skill set, you're going to be better at it. One of the aspects of my job involves carpentry as I build sets for a show. And students first starting out, they don't have the fine motor skills and they don't have the experience with tools to immediately, even if instinctively it's something that comes natural. The more that they do it, the better they get. And improv is the same way, but these are skill sets that apply outside of that. And so when you think about creative thinking, then when you're doing an improvisational exercise over and over with different circumstances, with different partners, then you find your brain, your thought processes become more flexible, and so you can respond quicker and you can come up with new and different ideas. And it's not just creativity, but it's things like adapting and flexibility. It's being able to collaborate and feed information to your partner, and then they're going to respond. And as they feed you information, it trains you to listen and pay attention to what it is that they're actually saying. And then you learn how to respond. So, if nothing else, it trains actively listening, and it tends to make our performers more comfortable and more collaborative. I always talk about the idea of stage fright, and whether that be as an actor or whether that be anytime you get in front of another person in order to present information or anything like that. There's a ton of different names for stage fright, but I always talk about it as sort of plate tectonics, if you remember, whatever fifth grade geography. I always think about it as these two colliding ideas, that you have this desire to do well at whatever it is you're doing, and then you have this doubt or this question, but what if I don't? And where those two meet is where that tension comes, that creates negative energy for stage fright. And when you do something like improv and you're up in front of a group and you're performing and you're reacting and the stakes are lower because there's nothing hanging in the balance, except learning, then you can make those safe mistakes, and you can learn from them and you can get better. And then when you actually are in our world, when you actually are on stage, then you're a little bit more comfortable with that performance aspect. And so I think, and I know we're going to talk about this, but I think these skills apply outside of the world of theater, just like when Ellen uses it with healthcare, but in the world of business, in the world of classroom management,
Mm.
when you are training a worker how to think and communicate clearly, then when they're actually out on the job floor doing the work, interacting with customers, then they're more comfortable, they're more creative, they're more flexible, and everything just works a little bit more smoothly because they've had the opportunity to make mistakes that don't impact your patients, or your audience or your clients and customers.
Yes, that's very good. Thank you. You know, when we really start digging into the connections between leadership and improv, we see the same words cropping up over and over and over again. And you've mentioned those, creativity, creative thinking, problem solving, collaboration, critical thinking, that active listening, communication, that's so important. We also start seeing trust and safety, which you've mentioned. And another one pops up over and over and over, and that is mindset. And I think that improv as a mindset is a really important thing for us to talk about. So let's Ellen, you put together this slide, which I love. So could you explain to us what improv as a mindset means?
Absolutely. So I'll read this quote for you by Peter Drucker. It says, "The model we have for management right now is the opera. The conductor of an opera has a very large number of different groups that he has to pull together. The soloists, the chorus, the ballet, the orchestra all have to come together, but they have a common score. What we are increasingly talking about today are diversified groups that we have to write the score while they perform. What you need now is a good jazz group." So, like I was talking about with the healthcare team, at the same time, everyone is an expert in their own discipline. And so sometimes different members of the team need to take the lead based on what the situation it needs. And so sometimes, even if you are the leader in a situation, recognizing that in this moment, maybe someone else needs to take over as the leader. And in different things like business, for example, you might not even know what your outcome needs to be yet. You might have a goal, but throughout the process, your goal may shift based on what you learned. And so it's having that the elasticity in the way that you think, and instead of this straight path, opening it up and opening to possibilities, I think, is a big concept that we talk about in improv. Is anything's possible. And I think that when you let other people take the lead when it's appropriate, it opens up to a better possible.
Yes. I think agility maybe is a good word to put in there. We talk about agile leaders, and it just seems like if you're using improv as a mindset, you are developing agility in your leaders, which, I mean, that's amazing. Thank you, Ellen. That quote by Peter Drucker is likely what inspired one of the foremost leaders in organizational behavior to write a very well-known article called Improvisation as a Mindset for Organizational Analysis, and this was published in 1998. Dr. Carl Weick of the University of Michigan used this metaphor of jazz improv to show how the tenets of improv can transfer into other fields. And this idea just took off, sort of made him a household name in leadership and in organizational behavior. And many business schools started requiring improv courses in their curriculum. And that all comes back to this idea, the metaphor of jazz improv as a leadership tool. And that all goes back to this guy. And if you know me at all, you know that I love to throw in a little bit of theory every time we're doing some application. So there's your theory for the day. Ben, what does someone with an improv mindset look like?
Yeah, great question. I actually want to start that by going back to something that you said that about being, oh, you said you're a preparer, and I think it's important to recognize when you look at where improv originates for theater, and when you look at the required mindset to do improv well in theater, you have to understand that I think that the danger is that people will think of improv as a substitute for preparation. Oh, I'm comfortable and I'm good at what I do. I'll just wing it. I'll just make it up as I go along. And that's not the intent of the type of improv that we're talking about today. In fact, improv, instead of a substitute for preparation, it's an extension of preparation. And if you look at the history of improv within the world of theater, it goes back centuries to types of theater within the Middle Ages and Renaissance, commedia dell'arte. But the modern version of what we see with improv comes from the 1950s, from a woman named Viola Spolin, who created some games. And she created them for her students in order to help them be more prepared and have this type of mindset that we're talking about. And what's funny is she did not ever see this as a strictly theater-based activity. She actually worked as part of the WPA at the time, and she worked with social workers. And her idea was that these kinds of critical thinking and empathetic exercises would be good for everyone, not just theater artists. And so I think she'd be pretty proud to see how it's been picked up by leadership and healthcare training and business training. But
Yes.
a mindset in the world of theater improv is very similar to some of the things that you've talked about. It's the back and forth leadership where you push something forward and then you wait to see what your partner is going to do with it. And then you listen and see what they're actually doing. You're not thinking of the next thing that you're going to do. It's important because you don't know enough about what they're going to do in order to set up what you're going to do next. You have to wait to hear from them. And it's important to understand that for theater, that is a vital skill. I think a lot of people outside of the world of theater think that it is memorize lines and say them on stage. And as long as you don't fall off the front of the stage, you're fine. And while those things are helpful, it's more than that. We've all seen bad acting, and some of the big differences between good acting and bad acting is the ability to engage with the people, the other characters on stage, listening to them. And so even in a scripted drama, your words are decided, but how you say them has to respond. And that's a really big mindset that comes out of
Mm.
improv. This, as I love the word agility that you mentioned before, that flexibility, adapting to what comes, always looking for growth, always looking for the chance to change and develop, but waiting until it fits with where you're at the moment.
Yes, that's very good. Thank you. I think this is a good point for us to transition to the power of yes.
Oh, yeah.
And in our preparation for this webinar, I think the three of us spent the most time talking about the simple word yes and how it can be used as a yes and as a no. Um, so let's talk about the differences between yes and yes but, and then we'll talk about yes if. So Ellen, help us get started with what all of this means with yes and.
Sure. So with improvisational theater, this is probably the number one rule. If you're going to participate in an improvisation exercise, the whole point is to keep the story moving. And so that is what yes and means. If someone says something to you, we're going to start an improvisation. Let's say someone says, I think we're on the moon. I can't say, no, we're not, because it's over, right? So I say, yeah, and I had no idea. They kept saying it was made out of cheese, but turns out it's not. It's slush. I don't know, whatever. And they have to say it can be as stupid as I want it to be, and they don't get to say, sorry, Ellen, that was stupid. We're going to do something different now. So the whole idea is to keep it going. And so when I commit to engaging in an improv exercise, I'm committing to meeting that person wherever they are, wherever they want to take me, and let's go. And to keep it going and to keep giving things that will engage the audience. And it's really important to be a generous scene partner, to give my partner something that they can work with instead of something that makes me sound the funniest, or that makes me look the best, or that makes it about me. The more generous I am as a scene partner, the better it is as a whole. And so that's definitely a large component of this. And when you say yes and, you are affirming what your partner has said, which is always a good idea. But then you're also committing to the possibilities of the situation that has been presented. And then it is allowing you to take that somewhere where you didn't even know it was going to go if you had been in charge of it yourself. And it's a huge component of collaboration. And yes and works in so many different, it works in healthcare, it works in business, it works in education. If you're talking about a teacher-student relationship, if you're working with a student and they give you something that you would have never, like, no, we're not going to do that. Okay, but you need to continue that conversation with that student. And so without shutting down communication, you then invite them to continue and you're able to go from there instead of shutting it down. So
Yeah,
that's basically the concept.
that's great. Thank you so much. I think that this would be a really good time for us to do the thing that is going to make me the most nervous. And that is some improv. So, audience, we actually need your help now. We we would like for you to put into the chat um, an excuse a student might give a professor for being late. So we're going to take one or two of your suggestions, and Ben and Ellen are going to work through what a yes and looks like, and then what a yes but looks like. So you really, really have to give us some ideas in the chat, or we can't go much further. We need your yes and. And while you're doing that, I'm going to stop the share of this screen so that we can actually see Ben and Ellen. Let me look and see what we've got in our chat. Okay, so we've got the line was long at the cafeteria. All right, so we're going to start with that one. Ben, you are the student. The line was long at the cafeteria. Ellen, you are going to practice yes and. Ready? Go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm late. The line was super long at the cafeteria.
Well, yeah, that tends to happen, especially if you do try to show up at the cafeteria right at noon. It's right. You're gonna be involved in a pretty big crowd. So perhaps something that we could do in addition to that is pack a snack so that just in case you're not able to get into the caf, you can take that snack with you and you're not having to worry about those lines.
Absolutely. Totally understand. But today was chicken strip day, and I can't skip chicken strip day.
Oh, I do love a chicken strip. That's true. Yeah, that's a great reason to be late for class. I probably would have been late too if I had known. It gets harder.
It does get harder. Okay. All right. So let's try that. Let's try what it looks like with a yes, but, and we'll swap your roles. So Ellen, you're going to be the student this time, and we'll use John Boone's I overslept. Okay. So Ben, you're the professor, and you're yes, but go.
Oh, Mr. Jones. I had rehearsal and then we didn't get out of dance rehearsal till midnight, and then I had to work on that project for your class. So I was up late working for your project, and I just overslept. Sorry. Can I still take the quiz?
Well, I understand. It is tough to manage all of your things. Yes, that is true. But you're going to have to work harder in the future, and so that you're not late, and so that you can complete these things. It's important for you to prioritize.
So you're saying I can't take the quiz?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the yes and is intended to continue the conversation and to keep the creativity going. The yes but is really just a no. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just another way of saying no.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's go back to slides for just a second, and um let's look at
And
this one.
again, I'm just going to add this in while you're switching.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
The the idea behind the yes is that you're saying yes to whatever your partner is establishing as a reality. It doesn't always mean that you agree with assertions that they make, right? And so when you transfer this concept to leadership, it's important to recognize that it's not always about letting people get away with whatever they want, right?
Right.
But it is acknowledging their reality And so again, it's easier for me to give examples in sort of the ludicrous, silly versions. And so if you have someone who your partner walks on stage and says, "Oh no, you're on fire," well, and so you're doing a scene, and now suddenly your partner has told you that you're on fire. And so the rule says you cannot just go, "No, I'm not." But you certainly can say, "Oh, I am. I hadn't noticed. Good thing I brought these marshmallows." Proceeds to roast marshmallows on their arm. Like you don't have to accept the assertion that being on fire is a bad thing. So again, with theater, there's this room for silliness and all this stuff, but when you transfer it to leadership, um, there Ellen's example that she got was she was late because she overslept. So I don't say, no, you didn't oversleep. You were hanging out with your friends and you just skipped. I'm not denying the reality. I'm accepting that she overslept, but I'm saying there's still consequences. And so it's important to recognize that even a yes and is not always 100% yes, and I agree with you.
Right.
So
Well, and
Thank
to
you.
add
without,
to that, sorry,
Yeah.
so in
Go
a
ahead.
healthcare space, when you're dealing with patients, sometimes the answer really does have to be no.
Yeah.
Like, no, you may not. No, we can't fill this early for whatever reason. And there may be some beautiful, wonderful, legitimate reason why they think that they need it then, but that does not change the reality of this is not going to happen.
Mhm.
But I also have to maintain that patient pharmacist relationship, and I want them to continue to trust me. And so you can say no without invalidating that patient's experience. So that's kind of adding to what Ben's saying.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for that clarification. The yes, but is a kinder, gentler sort of no, I guess,
Yeah.
is what we're saying. Um, let's move to the yes, if, because I honestly think that this is the one that is the option that's going to be more practical in the workplace and for leaders specifically. So rather than saying yes and or yes, but there are going to be times when we would need to say yes if. So, Ben, can you talk about what that might look like
Yeah. So, uh, you mean from a leadership standpoint or
from
from
whatever
theater?
standpoint you
Okay.
want to
All right.
use? Yeah.
All right. So just being able to, if you take it from a leadership standpoint and you're brainstorming ideas, and you're working on concepts, the ability to hear an idea and respond, and your first thought is, no, that doesn't work because this, and this. Well, instead of doing that from a leadership standpoint, if you train yourself to say, okay, all right, yeah, that might be able to happen. Yes, if we can also do this, and this in your methodology, right? And so instead of like crushing the original idea and saying, here's why you can't do it, instead you say, yeah, that might be a possibility if it also does these things. And so from a theater standpoint, when you say no, then the scene's over and you're not giving anything, you're stopping the whole situation. And so if you're using improv to train employees on how either they're leading other employees or you're training employees how to interact with customers, it just creates a better sense of how to manage relationships.
That is very good. Thank you. Um, you guys know I'm a huge Disney fan, and supposedly Walt Disney was the original yes guy, the yes if guy. He never wanted to say no. He never wanted to, squash creativity. So he would use the yes if, and that response helped push his teams to stretch and consider and explore until they had the best possible ideas, which really kind of leads very well into our next topic, which is building blocks. So let's go ahead and move to that. I'm watching the time, so I think we're doing okay. Alan sent me this book. I don't know if you can see this because I'm kind of small, but this is the book that Alan and I both read to prepare for this webinar. And Ben, sort of read it. I'm throwing you under the bus there, Ben. So that book by Karen Howe is about, it's called the Improvisation Edge. And it identifies this idea of building blocks as a mindset, as a key component for an improvisational leader. And she says that when leaders don't hesitate to engage with their team, so they jump in and they play and they shelve their egos and they bring at least one idea, which she calls a building block, to any situation, then we're in this building block mindset. And I think that yes and that yes if is very much a building block mindset. So Ellen, in the book that we read, there is an explanation about a bring a block exercise. You want to walk us through that?
Sure. So first of all, shout out to Julie Hickson Wallace for telling me about that book. So she turned me on to that book, and it's just full of gems. If you're in any sort of leadership position, I have little asterisks all over the book and highlights, and I don't normally do that. So shout out to that book. I highly recommend. But when you're talking about this, brainstorming is just, and by nature, it's supposed to be, you just throw it out there. You just throw it out there, and maybe something sticks and it might not. But when you're talking about brainstorming, you may or may not have a real goal in mind. It's different, as opposed to if we're going to have a thought generating exercise, the idea is we're building something. And so if we're just brainstorming and we all have a brick, and some of our bricks may be higher quality than others, who knows, but we don't know. But if we're just throwing them out there, all you have is a yard full of bricks. And if you got lucky, you might build a nice patio, but you did not build a structure. And so what it is instead of just throwing them all out there, is you might start with that, but then it requires paying attention to what the other people's bricks are bringing, right? Oh, well, I see your brick, and it looks like my brick might actually fit right on top of yours. And so we start to build a structure that actually can hold something. And it's much more productive as a meeting, and you don't leave the meeting going, well, I don't know, I had 17 different ideas, but I don't think they heard any of them. As opposed to not just putting out, but also receiving, and then being thoughtful about what other people are bringing to the table. And those sorts of things that can really spark more creativity. Creativity begets creativity, and you can come up with something that you would have never thought of on your own. And it ties back into the yes if I'm in a leadership position and someone comes to me and has a request, and if my first thought is no, well, then it's all over. But if I say yes if, they might have a really fantastic solution to that if that I would not have thought of. And so it's not even me as a leader giving permission or granting something. It's not like I'm giving you the conditional yes. It's more like you're providing what the in betweens, and they may have a great solution to those. And so you're also giving them some power in that situation, and giving the team some not even leadership, but just membership in the
That's good.
creation of, yeah. So
Yes.
that's kind of the difference.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is team agency, which look at that, it leads right into what we were going to talk about next. So, the concepts of teamwork and trust are huge in leadership studies. I mean, every single class that we teach has something about trust and working with your team in them. And we talk about it a lot. I mean, that's what we do. But I've also realized, because of you guys, that if you spend more than 5 minutes talking about improv, you're also going to run into these words as well and these ideas. And I keep coming back to the idea of trust, which Ellen was really just talking about in that idea generation. You're trusting each other to build upon one another's ideas. But Ben, why do you think trust is so important in improv?
Well, I mean, if you just think about connecting to the idea generation concept, whether or not you're brainstorming or block building, like Ellen was talking about, when people don't feel comfortable, when they don't trust the people that they're in the room with, then they're not gonna build anything with blocks, and they're not even gonna toss out a block, and they're gonna be quietly standing over to the side, ready to criticize when somebody else does.
Arms
And
crossed across the
yeah,
chest.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And so if you want to create an organizational model that inspires creativity and productivity and growth, then you have to have a sense of trust. For us in the world of theater, um, if you're going to get the best from your students who are performers, um, you have to make them feel like they can take those risks in the room with you, so they'll do it and they'll realize that they didn't get made fun of. Nothing bad happened. And the worst thing that could happen is they did something that they thought wasn't as good or could be better, and they can grow from it. And so when we do things like some of the short, really simple um, games that build skills, and we'll talk about some of those before we're done today, I think. Um, then then that creates this sense of trust. And then when we do a deeper dive into an improv that say explores a character, so they're researching a character for a class project, and maybe one of their final activities is we would do an interview where the teacher would ask questions of the student and they would answer as the character. And these are questions, it's not a quiz of facts. These are questions that you are making up, you're improvising based on what you know of the character. And sometimes they can be challenging. And if you're asking a character in a Arthur Miller drama about, their relationship with their parents or whatever, then they're making up sort of this tough emotional situation, and they can do it and kind of slough it off and kind of half-heartedly do it and wait for their peers to laugh, but they've not really committed, and it's a bad performance. Or they can lose themselves in the moment and be genuine and vulnerable, and it requires that trust. And the same thing is outside of the world of theater with your organization. Do your employees trust each other? Do they trust you as their
Right.
leader? And what are they willing to open up and make happen?
Right. I think that that is really important. And we're going to have to speed ahead in just a minute. But I do want to say that, one thing that I tell my students is if you're in a meeting, if you're leading a meeting and you're the only one talking, then number one, that's a big red flag. But number two, if no one is willing to talk, then you got trust issues at that table. And that is problematic for leaders. So let's jump ahead. We're going to try another round of improv, and we're going to try to show some team building and trust improv prompts. So on the screen are 4 different options. And audience, we're going to need your help again. So please give us a scenario in the chat. This can literally be anything that a couple of people would talk about. So any scenario that you want to put together. And then while you're doing that, I'll just really briefly explain what these team building ideas are. So questions only is where team members are going to act out a scenario, but the catch is that they can only ask questions. So when someone can't think of a question, that person is out. The exercise continues until only one person remains. Three-headed monster is also called one word at a time. And in this one, the group tells a story. So this requires at least 3 people, but it can be adapted for a much larger group. And the catch is that each person can only provide 1 word of the story at a time. So they build a story word by word. The problem solver requires 2 players. 1 player comes up with any sort of problem. The example I read was that the seals in the zoo had escaped. And then the other player has to solve the problem using any object that is nearby, which, could be a ruler. I don't know. And then the final one is club gesture. And many of us have probably done something like this as an icebreaker. It's recommended for large groups who don't yet know one another. And each participant is supposed to say a fun fact about themselves and then show some sort of hand gesture that goes with it. And then after each person shares, the whole group has to mimic that gesture. And then you try to get everyone to be able to go all the way around the circle and know everyone's thing and their gesture. So those are the four improv and trust building exercises that we have today. We're not going to be able to do all of them because we apparently like to talk. But I'm going to stop to share. I'm going to stop the share again, and I'm going to look over and see if someone gave us something awesome. And they didn't. Oh no. So we need an idea. What's a good idea that two people might be talking about that we could play questions only with? Anybody have one? Well, I guess we can use something like from the zoo. I'll come up with one. The Memphis Zoo, the tigers got out of the exhibit and are running wild through the zoo. So questions only. Ellen, you start.
Did you see the tigers got out of their cage?
Are you saying the tigers are loose?
Did you not see them?
Where are they?
Didn't you tell me earlier you thought that they needed to go to the bathroom?
They can. Oh no, see, I can't. Yeah.
It's
It's
harder
hard.
than you
It's
Yeah.
it's
really
harder
hard.
than you
Yeah.
think it's gonna be. It really is. So you'd take an idea like that. Like if I told you guys your prompt is to tell a story about a tiger and you had to do the three-headed monster one word at a time.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I told you to start with the word gray. Ellen, can you try that?
So we're telling a story about the tigers still, but I
Mhm.
have to start with the word gray.
Yes.
Okay. Gray.
I'm sorry. Say that again. You're
We're
doing the
telling
one
us
word at a time. Is that the one that?
One
Okay. So
word at a time.
I was
Yeah.
so
expecting question.
we're
Sorry.
two-headed monster.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
gray
Socks
were
near
the
cage.
at
The
zoo.
the
Zookeeper
looked
into
the
telescope
and
saw
the.
Big Dipper.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so when you're only doing two people like that, you'll notice I got a lot of really easy words like and the. And so when you're doing it around a big table or a big room of 5 people, 6 people, 10 people, then it gets a little harder. And when I did this with my high school students, I frequently I just started with once upon a time, and I would turn to the person next to me, and they would go. And then
Mhm.
I might would like she did, I might would develop it and have it start somewhere. And so there's all kinds of things there. The idea is that much like an athlete who has to lift weights, you're training the flexibility and agility of their mind. How quickly can they think on the go?
Good. Okay, we're running short on time, so let's go back to the slides and start wrapping up. Um, so I've shared this with with Ben and Ellen, and if any of you actually know me at all, this is not going to be surprising, but one of the hard things for me personally is accepting my own failures. Like I really, really hate to fail. I know nobody enjoys failing, but I have a hard time turning failures into successes, like in my mind. But I'm told by Ellen and Ben that improv is a really great way to practice turning mistakes into successes. So, Ben or Ellen, can you share how a mistake in improv might actually turn into a success really briefly?
Yeah. So if you have if we're doing an exercise with students and it falls apart, if we're doing questions and one of them it keeps coming up with statements or whatever, or you're doing an interactive storytelling and it just no one knows what to do, then what we will do is we'll stop and we'll point out why it stopped. So it may be that one of the partners didn't say yes and again, it's not quote unquote yes and, but they refuse their partner. And
Mhm.
so then what you would do is you would try to encourage them to take what that analysis says and you flip it around or you change it and say, what could you have said? And then they learn, okay, well, this would have been an opportunity. And so, in the world of leadership, and Ellen might speak to healthcare, if you're doing a patient simulation and a student, a healthcare student says or does something that could have like insulted or traumatized a real patient, then, in that situation, you might stop, analyze, say it, hey, this is what happened. How might you flip that? What else could you have said? And then try again. And they're not traumatizing someone who's expecting them as a healthcare expert to give them good care.
Right. Ellen, do you want to add anything real quick?
Well, and we're in an educational space, and so we have the luxury of making mistakes with relatively low consequences, which is thankfully. And so this is where feedback comes in. And when you do get a mistake, that's where okay, hang on, what went wrong? How can we do this different? And so in the spaces that we're in, and leaders in any position can do this too, is when you see something go wrong, that is your opportunity to, okay, what else could have happened? And then it doesn't even have to be, like if somebody puts a wrong answer on my test, here's the right answer. But if we're
Right.
doing a scenario based thing, there's probably not just one right way, but they messed up. They did something wrong, and they said something wrong. Then I can give them the opportunity to then, with more time, with maybe a little less pressure, because the stakes are low, to come up with 2 or 3 different ways that it could have gone differently. Because we're dealing with communication, we're dealing with, lots of different things. And sometimes it also depends on, um, things are not, they wouldn't be wrong to one person, but they're wrong to this person.
Right.
And so knowing your audience, that's a whole other thing. If you're performing for elementary school, you have to look different than when you're performing, to adults. And so
Right.
using those mistakes to think of other possibilities, essentially.
No, that's really good, and I appreciate that. Um, when I started thinking about all of the possibilities that could happen in a in a webinar on improv, it was terrifying and scary. So I just want to thank both of you for saying yes and to me when I asked, and really engaging and teaching me, because I came in with nothing, and I feel like I know a little bit now. So thank you both so much for that. What we like to do in our last couple of minutes on our webinars is to ask our audience to give us something that you're going to take away. One takeaway, one thing that you've learned, one thing that you enjoyed hearing in the chat. And we really do. We look through those, and I mine those for ideas for later webinars. So those are really important to me and to the center. So really do appreciate it when people put those in the chat. So, Ellen, do you have a takeaway you want to share with us while people are typing?
My takeaway would be, well, so I'm going to be entering the MAOL program in the fall, which I'm super excited about. And so I'm excited to bring this component of what I do into that space and see where I can take it. I think there's a lot of room for growth in this, so that's what I'm going to go for.
Absolutely. Yes. How about you, Ben?
Yeah, I'm going to tag in here too because I responded to a chat question. Someone
Yeah.
asked if they're where these exercises came from, or if they came from a book. There are two great books that go all the way back to Viola Spolin. She wrote a book called Improvisation for Theater, and then she had a follow-up book, which is just really a list of games and activities called Theater Games for the Classroom. And so you can look up her, Spolin is her last name, and find those books, and they have some great information. My takeaway is this is just a good reminder for me to be willing to be flexible and to listen to other people's ideas, and see the potential for working together instead of thinking, well, that wasn't how I would have done it. And that's always a good reminder.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm seeing Kevin Cale say that the reframing of brainstorming as thought generating, I think that was a really big one for me. But I think probably the most important thing for me as we were preparing was that yes if, just really engaging more creatively when I have to think as a leader. And when my first instinct is to just say no, to transform that into a yes if. That's very practical for me. Thank you all so much for coming, for being with us today. And oh, we got a yes if in parenting. Oh my goodness, yes. Absolutely. Improv is a fantastic example of something we can do to invite people into creative and safe spaces where they can learn and where they can play and grow. And that in turn is just going to create positive emotions that continually sort of loop upwards so that people are continually building just positive experiences upon each other because of something that's creative like improv. And so I'm really excited to add this, sort of to my tool belt. And I appreciate all of you for being with us today to learn a little bit more. You can leave when you're ready to leave. I'm going to share my screen one more time so that I can plug our May webinar, which is going to be about the benefits of creating mindfulness practices at work. And we're going to host that on May the 29th. And I'm excited. I'm going to have two of my MAOL alumni join me for that conversation. And they are fantastic at mindfulness. So I hope you can join us for that. Thank you for being with us. Have an incredible day. We wish you the best, and we hope that you have a yes and sort of day. Thank you. Bye.